The Horses Stay Behind by Major Oliver Hogue, 14th Australian Light Horse Regiment, known to soldiers during the war as Trooper Redgum. In days to come, we'll wander west and cross the range again. We'll hear the bushbirds singing in the green trees after rain. We'll canter through the Mitchell grass and press the bracing wind, but we'll have other horses. Our chargers stay behind. Around the fire at night, we'll yarn about old Sinai. We'll fight our battles over again, and as the days go by, there'll be old mates to greet us. The bush girls will be kind, and still our thoughts will often wander to the horses left behind. I don't think I could stand the thought of my fancy hack just crawling round old Cairo with a jippo on his back. Perhaps some English tourist out in Palestine may find my broken-hearted whaler with a wooden plough behind. No, I think I'd better shoot him and tell a little lie. He floundered in a wombat hole and then lay down to die. Maybe I'll get court-martialed, but I'm damned if I'm inclined to go back to Australia and leave my horse behind.
Arthur Chambers, 2nd Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds at Tel El Jemi, 20th of April, 1917, aged 30.
Norman Bethune, 8th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received at Gaza, 19th of April, 1917, aged 31.
Stanley Berryman, Canterbury Mounted Rifles Regiment, killed in action at Amman, 27th of March, 1918, aged 27.
Francis Burton, 4th Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action at Beersheba, 31st of October, 1917, aged 24.
James A. Loaf, 3rd Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received at Beersheba, 7th of November, 1917, aged 27.
Robert Miller, Auckland Mounted Rifles Regiment, killed in action at Tel El Saba, 31st of October 1917, aged 23.
Albert Muir, 2nd Australian Light Horse Machine Gun Squadron, killed in action in Palestine, 5th of November 1917, aged 24.
Ernest Craigs, 12th Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action at Beersheba, 31st of October 1917, aged 19.
John Tatham, Wellington Mounted Rifles Regiment, died of illness in Lourdes, 18th of October 1918, aged 43.
Essington Zouch, 7th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received in the Battle of Gaza, 17th of November 1917, age 27.
Wilson Dunlop, 7th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received in the Battle of Romani, 11th of September 1916, aged 24.
Thomas Sharland, Canterbury Mounted Rifles Regiment, died of wounds received at Amman, 1st of April 1918, aged 21.
Walter Courtman, 1st Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action at Qadiyah in Egypt, 3rd of August 1916, aged 26.
William Brennan, 12th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received at Tel El Jami, 20th of April, 1917, aged 30.
Claude Hill, New Zealand Mounted Machine Gun Squadron, killed in action at Nahar Al Oja, 25th of November 1917, aged 21.
Lindsay Field, 3rd Australian Camel Battalion, killed in action at Gaza, 19th of April 1917, age 23.
Butte Charters, 12th Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action at Beersheba, 31st of October 1917, aged 28.
John Turnwald, Imperial Camel Corps, New Zealand, killed in action in southern Palestine, 6th of June 1917, aged 23.
Leslie Magar, 8th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received at Beersheba, 1st of November 1917, aged 42.
Clifford McWhirter, 10th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds in Palestine, 6th of October 1918, aged 22.
Arthur Batchelor, Canterbury Mounted Rifles Regiment, died of wounds received at Nahar Al Oja, 27th of November 1917, aged 28.
John Marsh, 5th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received at Gaza, 6th of November 1917, age 24.
Richard Graham, 1st Australian Camel Battalion, killed in action in Palestine, 19th of April 1917, aged 23.
John Budge, Imperial Camel Corps, New Zealand, killed in action in Palestine, 13th of November 1917, aged 30.
Victor Turnbull, 7th Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action in Palestine, 7th of May 1918, aged 19.
Osborne Johnson, 1st Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action at Tel El Kuweofe, 3rd of November 1917, aged 30.
Edwin Baldwin, Wellington Mounted Rifles Regiment, killed in action at Oyun Kara, 14th of November 1917, aged 24.
Randolph Creswell, 3rd Australian Camel Battalion, killed in action near Tel El Kuweofe, 6th of November 1917, age 27.
Thomas Errington, 8th Australian Light Horse Regiment, died of wounds received in Palestine, 3rd of May 1918, aged 30.
Gilbert King, Auckland Mounted Rifles Regiment, died of wounds received at Oyun Kara, 15th of November 1917, aged 43.
Lance Blackwell, 4th Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action in Palestine, 4th of May 1918, age 37.
Harry Bunyan, 12th Australian Light Horse Regiment, killed in action at Beersheba, 31st of October 1917, aged 20.
Please please, our commemorative service is about to begin. Can I ask everyone in our VIP area in front of me to please take your seats immediately? Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our commemorative service is about to begin. Tell me when you want another one. In our VIP area to please take your seats immediately. Our commemorative service is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, our commemorative service is ready to start. Would you please take your seats?
Service is starting in 2.5 minutes. If you could please take your seats.
The service is starting almost immediately. Would you please take your seats?
I just had to confirm one wreath.
Our service is starting.
You've got 2 minutes.
Please take your seats so we can commence our commemorative service. Thank you. Can I ask all media please to leave the VIP area? Our commemorative service is going to start.
Okay. In 1 minute, you're live to air. Sit down, please.
Our commemorative service will be live on air in less than 1 minute. Can we ask you to please take your seats? Thank you very much.
We're shooting this way. We're starting here, behind you. No, not in here. Moving up.
maira koroma nā tamatoa tū mātauenga I tēnei whenua tapua Beersheba I pare kuratia nei koutou e rere ai te totoanga tīpuna koutou kua hinga I te ringa I te riri o te mura te ahi te mamaina te pōri nui tēnei rā e te tau au hoki maira ki te kainga tūturu tatari ana kia kaitau hoki wairua maira hoki wairua maira hoki wairua maira tēnei rā kawea mai ngā mokapuna mai Aotearoa me te pāpaka nui a Maui I raru I te marumaru o ngā hoia haere ki te pakinga nui o te ao nei rā te whakamihi atu ki a koutou e te tini e te mano koutou ki tūraki ki raro rā tangikau ana tanakau ki a koutou I kawea mai nā taonga mirimiri, te aroha, te hupe, ngā roi mata, kia tangihi anō tātou nei Takoto mai te whenua humari nekehia tātou nā tahi takoto mai rā, takoto mai rā, takoto mai rā. Kia maumahara tonu tātou
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Major General Dave Chalmers of the Australian Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's my privilege to be your Master of Ceremonies today. We gather in Beersheba War Cemetery, Israel, to remember and acknowledge the service and sacrifice of all Australian and New Zealand men and women who served in the Battle of Beersheba and the Sinai-Palestine campaign from 1916 to 1918. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand? Our service today begins with the mounting of the Guidon Party, comprising of Guidons from the 4th 19th Prince of Wales Light Horse Regiment and the 12th 16th Hunter River Lancers Regiment from the Australian Army, and the Queen Alexander's Mounted Rifles Regiment from the New Zealand Defence Force. The mounting of the Guidon Party will be followed by the mounting of the Catafalque Party, comprising of members of Australia's Federation Guard and the New Zealand Defence Force.
Get on, party! Ho! Get on, party, we'll move to your right in file. Right! 2. Get on, escorts. Take post. Get on, escorts. present. Up. Get on escorts, 18.
Catapult party, quick, march. Catapult party, present. Catapult party, reverse. Catapult party, slow! Catapult party, halt! Catapult party, out once, turn. Catapult party, rest on. About, turn, quick, march.
Please be seated. I now invite the Honourable Dan Tehan MP, Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister assisting the Prime Minister for the Centenary of Anzac, to deliver the formal welcome.
It is my honour, on behalf of the Australian Government, to welcome you all here today to this place that remembers those Australians who fought and died for us. I would particularly like to welcome Mr Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel, and Sarah Netanyahu. The Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, Prime Minister of Australia, and Mrs Lucy Turnbull. Her Excellency the Right Honourable Dame Patsy Reddy, GNZM QSO Governor-General of New Zealand. The Governor of Queensland, His Excellency the Honourable Paul de Jersey AC and Mrs Kay de Jersey. Ambassadors and representatives from the Diplomatic Corps. Mrs Miri Regev, the Minister of Culture and Sport. The Honourable Bill Shorten MP, Leader of the Opposition, and his wife Chloe. Mr Itzhak Herzog, Leader of the Opposition of Israel. Other representatives from the governments and parliaments of Israel, Australia and New Zealand. Representatives from the Australian states of New South Wales and Victoria. Major General Yosef Bakar, Israel Defence Force. Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, AO DSC, Chief of Army, representing the Australian Defence Force. Major General Peter Kelly, MNZM, Chief of Army, representing the New Zealand Defence Force. Mayor Ruvik Danilovich, Mayor of Beersheba. The Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr Simon Lewis, PSM, Mr Ian Hussein, Director, Mediterranean Area Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to commemorate the centenary of the First World War's Sinai-Palestine campaign. Here at Beersheba 100 years ago, Australians and New Zealanders fought to end a war that had begun for them at Anzac Cove. For the people of Australia and New Zealand, the war here in the Middle East added an important and enduring chapter to the Anzac story. In a land that many had only heard of in Scripture, the Light Horsemen, the New Zealand Mounted Rifles and the Cameleers fought through the Holy Land. This was a challenging campaign. In August 1916, at Romani against a strong Turkish force, the Anzac mounted troops began to pay the ultimate price. It was only bold last-minute actions that decided the battles at Rafah and Magdaba. This bravery would be the mark of these men, part of the legacy that we gather here to commemorate. At Gaza, they met an impenetrable wall. Twice the Allies had made the attempt to take it. It was only here at Beersheba that bravery led to eventual success. Throughout this campaign, long hours in the saddle, the scarcity of water, the lack of fresh fodder for horses in the desert, the dust and heat of the Middle Eastern summer, the hazards of battle and the absence of comforts behind the lines tested the Anzacs, sometimes to the limits of their endurance. The fight at Beersheba would be one fuelled only by the will and bravery of men and horses. It would have a legacy built in victory, a rarity for Australia at this stage of the First World War. It would also leave a legacy that helped form our nation. Take Cecil Norman O'Brien. He fought at Romani, Magdaba, Rafah, Beersheba and Gaza. A colourful character, he had charges laid against him in 1919 during demobilisation for refusing to undertake orders as directed. I think my children would have liked him. His descendants have fought in every major war Australia has participated in since, and his great-grandson Tom Moore not only fought in Afghanistan, but he's here with us as part of the Australian Cyber Delegation as the CEO of a successful veterans transition startup. But such is the nature of war, of sacrifice, not all made it home. Our thoughts must turn to those who lost their lives here, 32 Australians who were killed in the charge. We come here to honour them and all those who fought and died. In the immortal words of Charles Bean, the official war historian at the time, it had been a glorious hour, filled not only with military achievement of a very rare kind, but with memorable deeds by individual officers and men, which serve vividly to demonstrate the spirit which alone made success possible, lest we forget.
Thank you, Minister. This morning's call to remembrance will be delivered by Major General Peter Kelly, MNZM, Chief of Army of the New Zealand Defence Force.
A century ago, the Australians and New Zealanders of the Desert Mounted Corps were part of a famous victory here at Beersheba. In a bold outflanking manoeuvre, which made full use of the mobility of the Australian and New Zealand mounted men, Allied forces swept down upon Beersheba from the east. Barring their advance was the Ottoman strongpoint of Tel al-Sabah, which dominated the flat ground leading into the town. The New Zealand Mounted Rifles Brigade, with support from the Australian and British units of the Anzac Mounted Division, was given the key task of capturing this key position. Tel al-Sabah was defended by a strong, well-entrenched Ottoman garrison that included a machine gun company whose weapons could sweep the approaches to Beersheba. The New Zealanders closed up on the hill and then launched their assault on its steep, rocky slopes. After much hard fighting, they secured Tel al-Sabah. With the hill in New Zealand hands, the door was open for the light horsemen of the Australian Mounted Division to launch their famous charge into Beersheba that completed the rout of the enemy forces and secured the town and its vital wells. The capture of Beersheba was part of a larger plan to trap and destroy the main Ottoman forces defending Palestine. Lack of water, however, and strong Ottoman rearguard actions frustrated these hopes and allowed most of the Ottoman army to escape. It would take another year of heavy fighting, including victories and defeats for both sides, before the Ottoman Empire asked the Allies for an armistice in October 1918. Beersheba is but one example of the Anzac Brotherhood in arms, of the kind that has been seen on so many battlefields since. This brotherhood is personified by Corporal Herbert Douglas, a motion picture show operator from Melbourne, who died of wounds received at Beersheba, serving in the Canterbury Mounted Rifles of the New Zealand Mounted Rifles Brigade. In 1918, on the anniversary of his death, Douglas's family put an in memoriam message in their local newspaper, expressing their love for an Anzac hero who would be ever remembered. Today, as we look back over 100 years to this celebrated victory, we remember those other battles in which New Zealanders and Australians have fought together and continue to serve together. It was a long campaign fought in difficult conditions against a brave and determined foe. Above all, we remember the Anzac soldiers who lost their lives. As the Australian and New Zealand memorials and cemeteries remind us, they came from the utmost ends of the earth, never to return, but are honoured still for their service and their sacrifice.
Thank you, General Kelly. A prayer of remembrance and a prayer for peace will be delivered by Monsignor Glyn Murphy, OAM, Director General Chaplaincy, Australian Army, and Principal Chaplain Anthony Hawes, QHC, New Zealand Defence Force.
A prayer of remembrance. Ever present and loving God, we remember before you today that a century ago you remained with every soldier from our allied nations amidst the sacrifice and destruction of the Sinai-Palestine campaign. We recall that they quelled fear through courage, far from home and family, seeking peace and freedom for our world. We remember and give thanks for their steadfast loyalty to each other amidst the worst days of their young lives. Remind us, our Creator, that the best of our human spirit can shine through the darkest of times. In remembering this saving truth, help us guard against such darkness for the good of future generations. Amen.
I mua o te atua, e iwi ko tahi tātou. God of yesterday, today and forever, as we gather this day to remember those who fought that our world may know peace, we are once again struggling with the threat of those who desire war. We pray for peace only too aware of the horrendous cost of war and its endless destruction. We pray for our world in these days of tension, that you would see that reason, patience, understanding, and forbearance would rule in the place of fear, greed, and hatred. Grant your wisdom to leaders everywhere, that they may have the courage to do what is right, and words of grace, strength, and hope for those they lead and those they reason with. Give them faith to see that good can overcome evil and love can overcome hatred. We pray that we may do our duty without fear or favour to fight for justice, truth, and righteousness, so that finally peace may triumph in the hearts and minds of all mankind. Amen.
Thank you, Monsignor Murphy and Chaplain Hawes. Our first commemorative address today will be delivered by the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu. Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, this is Lucy Turnbull, Governor General of New Zealand, Dame Patsy Reddy, Sir David Gascoigne, Governor of Queensland, Paul de Jersey, Chief of the Army of New Zealand, Major General Peter Kelly, Chief of the Army of Australia, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, Australia's Ambassador to Israel, Mr. Christopher Canan, I love that name. New Zealand's Ambassador to Israel, Mr. Jonathan Kerr, Leader of the Opposition, Bill Shorten, Members of Parliament, the Head of the Opposition, Isaac Herzog, Members of my government, Minister Miri Regev, Minister Ayub Kara, the Mayor of Beersheba, then a village of a few huts, today 250,000 people, within a decade, 500,000 people. Thank you, Anzac soldiers. And the families of the brave Aussies and Kiwis who fought here and died here. Nearly 4,000 years ago, Abraham came to Beersheba, the city of seven wells. Exactly 100 years ago, brave Anzac soldiers liberated Beersheba for the sons and daughters of Abraham and opened the gateway for the Jewish people to re-enter the stage of history. The heroism of your fallen men will never be forgotten. The brave soldiers who are buried here played a crucial role in defeating the Ottoman Empire, liberating the Holy Land, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule in one great dash. This momentous occasion was a historic milestone in the natural kinship between our peoples. When I say natural, I don't just mean the way we address life and each other, that easy informality, that warmth. That was evident from the moment our people met your people. I mean something deeper, because there's a historical significance of what happened here. Anzac soldiers went on to capture Jerusalem, Tiberias, Megiddo, and then continued northwards. They were actually retracing the footsteps of the heroes of the Bible. They were stepping on the verses of the Bible, and they knew it. And their clergy that spoke here so movingly a moment ago, they know it too. And this partnership began 2 years earlier, in 1915, with a great defeat. In the defeat of Gallipoli, two things were forged. One, the absolute resolve of the Anzac forces to redeem their fallen brethren and establish this glorious victory here. And the second thing that was forged was the first meeting between Anzac fighters and Jewish fighters, the first Jewish fighters who stood shoulder to shoulder with them in Gallipoli, the first Jewish fighting force in 2,000 years. And that continued here with the Jewish Legion that helped liberate Palestine here in this campaign that we mark today. This was a point of partnership that has historic significance today. When I joined the Israeli army 50 years ago, joined our special forces, I was given a broad hat. It was called an Australian hat. It was very good to shield ourselves from the sun. We also sat next to eucalyptus trees that came from Australia. And we learned about the ethos of courage of Australian and New Zealand soldiers. We talked about it. We drank it in. It stood as a shining example for us. It was an example of the spirit of fortitude and courage and the willingness to act in the defense of our people and our values. These are the values that guide us today as well. We saw here in Beersheba 800 cavalry go against 4,000 embedded Turks with machine guns, with bunkers. The few won against the many. That's the spirit of the Army of Israel. It stands today. We set out a simple policy. We seek peace with all our neighbors, but we will not tolerate any attacks on our sovereignty, on our people, on our land, whether from the air, from the sea, from the ground, or below the ground. We attack those who seek to attack us. And those who contemplate that, I strongly advise you, do not test the will of the State of Israel or the Army of Israel. When the Light Horse were charging here, their commanders were worried about the absence of water. Today, we do not worry about that. A few months ago, we signed an agreement on water between Australia and Israel. It can apply to New Zealand. We can make water. We can change the world. What we established here with the rise of Israel, the rise of technology, the rise of ingenuity, is that we can cooperate to better the lives of our peoples and of all people everywhere. That too, we should remember at the Battle of Beersheba. I believe that those soldiers who fell here would be proud of the deep and enduring alliance between our countries today. As then, today we stand on the same side of history, on the right side of history. We stand for progress, we stand for peace, we stand for democracy, we stand against tyranny and terror. Israel salutes the sacrifice of these brave soldiers. We will never forget them. We will forever honor and treasure their memory. Thank you.
Thank you for those warm words of gratitude and friendship, Prime Minister. I now invite the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull MP, Prime Minister of Australia, to deliver an address.
Well, thank you very much. And Bibi, thank you so much for your warm address and your warm welcome. And thank you joining us here with Sarah and the leaders of Israel. Thank you to the Governor-General of New Zealand, representing our Kiwi brothers and sisters. And of course, I'm here with Dan Tehan, the Minister for Veterans Affairs, and as I was saying earlier, Bibi, the Minister assisting me on cyber security, which has been a key priority of his visit here. And of course, we're joined, Lucy and I are joined by Bill Shorten and Chloe Shorten, the Leader of the Opposition, and his wife, and so many other Australian parliamentarians. The leaders of our three nations are here assembled. And we're here assembled because we are honouring an extraordinary battle, an extraordinary campaign, which made history, which fulfilled history. A tale of incredible courage, of men and horses. Horses that came, many of them, from a part of New South Wales that Lucy and I know very well, the Hunter Valley. Indeed, the horses were called whalers. I think there's some of the Murrurundi team up there, I reckon. Few Haydens in the stands, I would say. And the horses, you know, the horses were as legendary as the men that rode them. Bill the Bastard, that was a horse. That was a horse, I hasten to add. He was unrideable. He was a rogue. And one Michael Shanahan managed to ride him, managed to break him in. And after he was wounded at the Battle of Ramadi, Bill the Bastard returned Shanahan to the Australian lines, carried him back, returned him, so legend says, not to the medical officer, but to the vet. And then, of course, Guy Hayden, who, like so many of the young Australian bushmen, came with his own horse, Midnight, who was killed at the Battle of Beersheba, leaping over a Turkish trench. The Turk fired up through the horse, wounding, killing the horse, killing Midnight, and wounding Guy Hayden. But so much courage from these animals. And we, you know, I recall as a young boy listening to the First World War stories of my grandfather, who was not in the Light Horse, I hasten to add. He served on the Western Front. But one of the most bitter, heartfelt stories of those old soldiers was of the fact that the horses did not come home. Banjo Paterson, who was also in the Light Horse, one of our greatest poets, wrote beautifully about that, the horses that didn't come home. And shooting the horses was, for so many of those men who had seen horrors beyond imagination, the worst moment of that war. Now, you mentioned, Bibi, that the soldiers knew they were walking in lands filled with history. And of course, at a generation that was perhaps much more familiar with the Bible than perhaps our generation is, every place was a household name. Mind you, there was a limit to how much biblical education one could absorb on campaign. And one of the troopers in the Light Horse, Eon Idrius, wrote a diary and turned it into a book, The Desert Column. And he talks about a Bible enthusiast in his troop who was regularly giving them lectures about wherever they were. And when they reached Ashdod, the Bible enthusiast became very, very, very motivated. And he climbed on top of an empty German beer barrel. Idris lamented that it was empty. Of course, with the Australians, it wouldn't have remained full for very long, but it was empty. And he told them the history of Gaza, Ascalon, Ashdod, Gath and Ekron, And just as he had gotten to the 29-year siege of Psammetichus, Idrius concludes, "A shell has just burst above the Bible enthusiast," and he ended his lecture abruptly. 5 shrapnel bullets whizzed right through the barrel. One gets the feeling that he'd had enough history lessons. The battle, of course, was in effect a defiance of the norm, a defiance of history. The Australian light horse were not meant to fight on horseback. They were mounted infantry, and they were to ride to the battle, dismount. One man would hold the horses, 3 others would go in and fight like infantry. But on this occasion, water was short, they had no choice. And General Harry Chauvel ordered that afternoon that they had to charge. And he said, "Put Grant straight at it." And what William Grant and the men of the 4th and 12th Light Horse Regiments achieved that day was astonishing. They charged 6 kilometres into Turkish fire. Their determination was unstoppable. Idrius wrote, who watched it, he was on an observation post. He said, "At a mile distant, their 1,000 hooves were stuttering thunder. Coming at a rate that frightened a man, they were an awe-inspiring sight, galloping through the red haze, knee to knee and horse to horse, the dying sun glinting on bayonet points." And he went on to say that captured Turkish and German officers have told us they never dreamed that mounted troops would be madmen enough to attempt rushing infantry redoubts protected by machine guns and artillery. The mad Australians was a common description. Not so mad, brave, heroic, turning the tide of history, making history, fulfilling history. The horses, as I said, they were stock horses. Now, the Australian stock horse was looked down on by some of the English officers. We were told that they weren't purebreds, but Australian stock horses, as we know, are bred for their intelligence, their agility, their ability to work in all sorts of country, and particularly from the Hunter Valley and steep country, and their ability to anticipate, often better at mustering than the stockman that rides on them. They are the best of horses, the most intelligent of horses, and the most hardy of horses, as were the men that rode them. And this battle, you know, has become part of our history, part of our psyche. It is an extraordinary episode in our national story. Imagine these young men so far from home, out of the Australian bush, with their own horses, in a completely alien landscape, the only familiarity being the names of the places, and that from their Bible lessons. Of course, General Sir Harry Chauvel commanded the Desert Mounted Corps, but it was his nephew, Charles Chauvel, that made an extraordinary movie in 1939, 40,000 Horsemen. And you can imagine, Bibby, how isolated Australia felt in the Second World War. Hitler sweeping through Germany, Japan a looming threat. The protection of Mother England seemed a long way away. 40,000 Horsemen was a film that inspired a nation. It was a story of Australian victory, of courage, of determination, and it etched this battle permanently in our national story. And as a young boy at boarding school in the early 1960s, I have to say we watched it again and again and again. And all of us imagined that we could be there, spurring our horses over the Ottoman lines, fighting all the way up through the lands of the Bible, taking Jerusalem, liberating Damascus. As you know, that was done by a couple of Australian officers who got lost in the narrow streets, found their way to the town hall, and being not particularly concerned about what orders they'd been given, promptly accepted the surrender from the mayor. Their feats will never be forgotten. Their memory will never fade. The tradition of man and horse is part of us. It's part of Australia. It always will be. This was the last great cavalry charge in history. There were more men and horses in this charge than there were in the charge of the Light Brigade. It was a bigger charge, and it was successful. And they spurred their horses through that fire, those mad Australians, through that fire, and took the town of Beersheba, secured the victory that did not create the state of Israel, but enabled its creation. Had the Ottoman rule in Palestine and Syria not been overthrown by the Australians and the New Zealanders, the Balfour Declaration would have been empty words. But this was a step for the creation of Israel. And with their courage, it was. It was. And this, while those young men may not have foreseen, no doubt did not foresee, the extraordinary success of the State of Israel, its foundations, its resilience, its determination, its indomitability against overwhelming odds, their spirit was the same. And like the State of Israel has done ever since, they defied history, they made history, and with their courage, they fulfilled history, lest we forget.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand for the hymn, O God, Our Help in Ages Past. The music for this morning's service is provided by the Australian Army Band and the New Zealand Defence Force Band. Please be seated. I now invite the Governor-General of New Zealand, Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Dame Patsy Reddy, GNZM QSO, to deliver the final address this morning.
Rau rangatira mā, e kui mā, e koro mā, e whiwhi nei, Tēnei aku mihi mahana ki a koutou. Kia ora tātou katoa. I acknowledge the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, Prime Minister of Australia, and Mrs Lucy Turnbull, His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, and Mrs Sarah Netanyahu, Mr Ruvik Danilovich, Mayor of Beersheba, ministers, ambassadors, members of the diplomatic corps, military representatives, distinguished guests, and friends from New Zealand, Australia, and Israel. We gathered here to commemorate the Battle of Beersheba and the Sinai-Palestine campaign, which lasted from April 1916 till October 1918. The Allied victory in this campaign changed this region forever and ended hundreds of years of Ottoman rule in the Middle East. The Egyptian Expeditionary Force, in which the mounted troops of Australia and New Zealand formed such a critical element, won this victory with very limited resources. They faced a skillful and determined enemy, and they also had to contend with arduous conditions, including extremes of heat and cold, a chronic shortage of water, and venomous snakes and insects. All of their operations were predicated on the supply of water and other essentials. Without the construction of a pipeline and railway across the Sinai, it would have been impossible to sustain the Allied army in the desert. Victories here at Beersheba and elsewhere led to the capture of Jerusalem in 1917. In a year marked by great sacrifice and disappointment for the Allied cause, such victories were especially welcome. There was further hard fighting in Palestine before the Ottoman resistance collapsed in October 1918. Throughout this long campaign, the New Zealand Mounted Riflemen and the Australian Light Horsemen showed, as one New Zealander put it, plenty of nerve and dash, but there was also great sacrifice. On 14 November 1918, Brigadier General William Meldrum, the commander of the New Zealand Mounted Rifles Brigade, spoke at the dedication of a memorial at Ionkara. The memorial had been erected in honour of those who'd lost their lives in the New Zealand victory there 1 year earlier. His sentiments could apply to all the New Zealanders who died in the campaign. Brigadier General Meldrum said, "We grieve for them and we extend our deepest sympathy to the fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers and wives who've been so sadly bereaved of their beloved ones. They were endowed with a sacred sentiment that they were fighting for the future, for humanity, and for a better future for all of the countries where the light of liberty had not yet shone." The campaign we commemorate today lasted a little over 2 years, a mere blink of an eye in the history of this ancient land, but it changed political conditions in this region in the most profound way. During that time, the bonds between Australians and New Zealanders, first forged at Gallipoli, were further strengthened in the service of the Anzac Mounted Division in Sinai and Palestine. It's only fitting that we should join together today in remembering their service and their sacrifice. Ka maumahara tonu tātou ki a rātou. We will remember them.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Principal Chaplain Hawes of the New Zealand Defence Force will now read Psalm 23.
Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside restful waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me still. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forevermore.
Thank you, Chaplain Hawes. Official wreaths will now be laid in memory of all those who fought and died in times of war. Later in the service, there'll be an opportunity for others present to lay floral tributes as part of the public wreath-laying service. To lay wreaths on behalf of New Zealand, Australia and the State of Israel, the Governor-General of New Zealand, Her Excellency the Right Honourable Dame Patsy Reddy, GNZM QSO, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull MP, Prime Minister of Australia, and Mr Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Colonel Franz Mader, Defence Attaché for the Republic of Austria, Mr Anthony Hinton, Political Counsellor for Canada, Colonel Bruno Paul Constantini, Defence Attaché for the French Republic. Colonel Michael Hans Papelis for the Federal Republic of Germany, Lieutenant Colonel Jana Soroz, Defence Attaché for Hungary, and Group Captain Tejpal Singh, Defence Attaché of India. His Excellency Mr Mekan Mustafa Kemal Okum, Ambassador for the Republic of Turkey, His Excellency Mr David Quarry, Ambassador for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Brigadier General Martin, Representative of the United States of America. the Honourable Bill Shorten MP, Leader of the Opposition, and the Honourable Dan Tehan MP, Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister assisting the Prime Minister for the Centenary of Anzac. Governor of Queensland, His Excellency the Honourable Paul de Jersey AC and Mrs de Jersey, the Honourable David Elliott MLA, New South Wales Minister for Veterans Affairs, the Honourable John Uren MLA, Victorian Minister for Veterans Affairs, and Mayor Ruvik Danilovich, Mayor of Beersheba. Senior military representatives from Australia, New Zealand and the State of Israel, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, AO, DSC, representing the Australian Defence Force, Major General Peter Kelly, MNZM, representing the New Zealand Defence Force, and Major General Yosef Bakar, Israeli Defence Force. On behalf of all Australian veterans, Corporal Warwick Knaggs of 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment, Queensland Mounted Infantry, on behalf of all New Zealand veterans, Mr Clive Collingwood, and on behalf of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, Mr Ian Hussein, Director Mediterranean Area. And finally, on behalf of all Indigenous veterans, Mr Ricky Morris, a former Sergeant of the Australian Army. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the Ode, which will be recited by Warrant Officer Class 1 Don Spinks OAM, Regimental Sergeant Major of the Australian Army. The Ode will be followed by the last post, a period of 1 minute of silence, and the playing of the rouse.
Catapult party, A10, chun.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor their years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult Party, present arms. Catapult Party, shoulder, arms.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the national anthems of Israel, Australia and New Zealand.
Catapult Party, present arms.
nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair. Beneath our radiant Southern Cross, we'll toil with hearts and hands to make this Commonwealth of ours renowned of all the lands. For those who've come across the seas with boundless plains to share, with courage let us all combine to advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
God of nations, at thy feet, in the bonds of love we meet. Hear our voices, we entreat. God defend our free land. God Pacific's triple star, from the shafts of strife and war. Make her praises heard afar. God defend New Zealand.
Catafalque party, shoulder, arms.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing as I invite Monsignor Murphy to offer the final blessing.
May God bless our nations and world with enduring peace, through respect for the common sanctity of lives lived, through love shared. So may we honour the young lives of our allied forces who endured so much a century ago to bring such peace to humanity. This I pray through Christ, the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Thank you, Monsignor Murphy. We began our service this morning with the mounting of the Geedon Party and the Catafalque Party. We moved to our conclusion with their dismount.
Catafalque party in woods. Turn. Catafalque party, quick, march. Get on escorts. Present. Up. Get on escorts. 18. Turn. Get on escorts. Take. Post. Get on party, we'll move to your right in file. Right. 2. Get on party, quick!
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The final part of our service is the laying of personal wreaths and floral tributes. If you've registered your intention to lay a wreath or tribute, please make your way forward now. Could I ask everyone not laying a wreath to please remain in their seats during this period, and for wreath layers not to wait for their name to be called, but to move directly to and from the memorial as described by the brochure and indicated by the ushers. I call first direct descendants of veterans of the Battle of Beersheba and the Sinai-Palestine campaign. Mrs. Margaret Grant, the Honourable Justice Dennis Clifford, Judge of the New Zealand High Court, Ms Anne Clifford, New Zealand Consul-General, Milan and Trade Commissioner, Italy and Turkey, Ms Jessica Clifford, Ms Alice Clifford and Ms Lucy Clifford, Mr Stuart McDonnell, Mr Michael Halliday and Miss Anne Halliday, Ms Peter Flynn, Dr Robin Abel, Ms Jennifer Simmons, Mr John Corbyn, Ms Catherine Steadman and Mr Robert Unicum, Mr Brian Cantwell, Mr Lyle Cook, Mr Chris Smith, Mr Tim Smith, Mr Josh Smith, Ms Jessica Smith and Ms Amelia Smith. Mr John Collins, Mr Robert Graff, Mr Stephen Graff and Mr Roger Graff. Mrs Anthea Sutherland, Miss Judith Birchier, Mr Kenneth Bartell, Mrs. Elizabeth Clark, Mrs. Marjorie Beamish, Mr. Paul Barker, Ms. Vicky Liddington, Mr. Gary Walsh and Mrs. Maureen Walsh. Lieutenant Colonel Donald Shearman, RFD. Mrs. Susan Meyer. Mr. Guy Richardson, Mrs. Christine Richardson and Aidan Richardson. Ms. Kay Richardson, Mr. Leslie Richardson and Liam Richardson. Mr. Kristen Gunning. Ms. Bronwyn Kirby. Ms. Elaine Roger and Mr. Kenneth Jackson. Ms. Mandy Hargraves. Mr. Tom Trimmel. Ms. Christine Newwand. Ms. Dawn Manning. Ms. Louise Coman. Mr. Lance Walters. I beg your pardon, Mr. Lance Waters. Elder Alfred Uncle Boydie Turner. Mr. Peter Harrison. Mrs. Joan Fogarty. Mrs. Patricia Freeman. Miss Patricia McPherson. Ms. Jennifer Missenden. Mr. Michael Kelleher. Ms. Diane Rankin. Mrs. Elsie Amamu. Mr. Julian Lesser MP and his mother, Mrs. Sylvia Lesser. Mr. Warwick Palmer and Mrs. Jennifer Palmer. Mr. John Corbin. Ms. Sally Brennan. Mrs. Olwen Shea. Federal, state and local government representatives. Senator Linda Reynolds, CSC, the Honourable Dr. Mike Kelly, AM MP, and Miss Gay Brotman, MP. Major Robert Mount Whitten, Rabbi Ralph Kennedy, Commander Paul Kerber, RAN, and Mr. Andrew Hamilton. Mr. Peter Allen. Mr. David Gonski, AC, and Mr. Ian Narev. Major General Retired Ode Nahashton and Mr. Leon Kempler, OAM. Ms. Jill Siegel and Ms. Michelle Bloom. Mr. Noel Seaton and Mrs. Denise Seaton. Mr. Aaron T. Roche. Mr. John Baker. Mr. William Fogarty. Mr. Peter Smaller, President, Jewish National Fund of Australia, and Mr. Dan Springer, CEO, Jewish National Fund of Australia. Mr. Joel Ginge. Lieutenant General Retired Ken Gillespie, AC, DSC, CSM, and Dr. Anthony Bergen. Mr. John Rosmus and Mrs. Margaret Rosmus. Ms. Barbara Miller and Mr. Norman Miller. Mr. Derek Bound. Mr. Mike Nitzen. Mr. John Weiss. Mr. Bruce Richardson and Mrs. Lynn Richardson. Ms. Leanne Corrigan. Heidi Davey. Ezra Pimentel. Ms. Brioni Bale. Mr. Paul Haynes. Ms. Gillian Curry. Mr. Mike Cohen. Members of the Matt McLaughlin Battlefield Tours. Would any other members of the general public who wish to lay a tribute please come forward now? The final tribute at this morning's service will be laid by Dr. David Hudson on behalf of all Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander servicemen and women. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our official ceremony here at Beersheba War Cemetery. Thank you for your attendance and good morning.